Hi, everybody. I'm Renee Miller. I'm the Associate Director of the Oregon Bioscience Incubator and OTRADI. And I want to welcome you all to this Lunch and Learn, this pretty popular Lunch and Learn on two of Business Oregon's most popular programs for startups. So while we get settled, here are some housekeeping items on the screen right now. I want to make sure that we can hear our presentation, so please stay muted. But I encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat. And you can also use the chat to ask questions of the presenters. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started. OTRADI would like to acknowledge the land we're all on, wherever we may be. OTRADI conducts business throughout Portland and beyond, and is making an effort to acknowledge the history of the area and work toward decolonization of the bioscience industry. Portland rests on traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes who have made their homes along the Columbia River. So please join us in acknowledging the land we're all on throughout Portland and beyond. And to learn more about Portland's native, diverse, and vibrant community, please read Leading with Tradition, a document created by the Portland Indian Leaders Roundtable. And there's a link to it in the chat. So this program is going to be great. The Oregon Innovation Council, also called Oregon Inc., oversees Business Oregon's innovation programs and has a variety of resources to support innovators to take new technologies from idea to market. It provides crucial early funding that promising technologies and entrepreneurs need to grow. So today we'll learn about two of their programs that help innovation-based companies accelerate their growth and access private capital in their early stages. Oregon Inc.'s SBIR program helps Oregon companies take advantage of non-dilutive federal funding. The program includes application support grants to help companies prepare better applications that are more likely to be funded, as well as matching grants to fill gaps where federal funds cannot be used and to help get technologies closer to market. The Commercialization Gap Fund supports companies as they develop their products to be ready to go to market, providing investment for the commercialization gap that exists between initial startup and when private investment is available. OBI and OTRADI is Oregon's Bioscience Signature Research Center, a program run by Business Oregon and the Oregon Innovation Council. We're funded in part by the Oregon State Lottery, administered by the Oregon Business Development Department. And we want to thank Business Oregon and the Oregon Innovation Council for your support. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce our presenters today. Our first speaker, Mark Brady, is the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Manager at Business Oregon, leading the team working to support the state's entrepreneurs and early stage companies. He leads a team of staff working on innovation, entrepreneurship, and capital programs to ensure innovation helps Oregon's economic diversity and to be more resilient. Previously, he was an innovation strategist at the agency, working with universities and others to turn research into new companies and jobs, managing the state's SBIR supports program and leading the agency's work with the Oregon Innovation Council. Mark has over 20 years of experience in the public and private sectors and has master's and bachelor's degrees in engineering from Columbia University and the University of Miami. And next we have Jordana Barkley. She's an innovation strategist at Business Oregon, where she manages a variety of innovation-focused programs to support science and technology companies. Prior to Business Oregon, she created and supported local and statewide industry-led partnerships focused on workforce development. Jordana has over 20 years of experience in developing and implementing programs that support businesses, innovators, and communities. She has a bachelor's degree from Wake Forest University and a master's degree from the University of Michigan. Welcome to both of you. So I'm going to stop sharing in a second, but our presenters will share their information in 3 sections, and we'll have time for questions and answers between each section and again at the end. So Mark, if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Yep. Thank you. And can you see my slides now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you for putting our email addresses in the chat. anybody is free to contact us. It's also on these slides here later. So please reach out if you have questions. And like Renee said, we will pause here in a minute. So we want to start out, just do a little overview on the agency, and then we'll dive into the specifics of the programs that we're here to talk about. And before I start, I just want to say, apologize for the slight delay on the start here. That was on me, not Otrati. That was my mess up there. So thank you for your patience getting started. Let's jump right in. Easier said than done. There we go. So Business Oregon, for those who don't know, we are the state's economic development agencies. We are a state agency. There's 5 divisions. We have roughly 170 people, give or take 10 at any given day. Most of those people are based in Salem office. Myself and Jordana and a number of others are up here in Portland. And then we have regionally based staff as well that live in the communities in which they work. We are part of the Innovation Entrepreneurship team, which is under the Innovation and Business Resources division of the agency. It's a relatively new grouping within the agency, but it has grown quite a bit over time, which just shows the interest and the priority that our agency is putting on innovation as a part of our economic development strategy. But we also have teams around business finance, global trade. We have an infrastructure division as well, and then also arts and film are in our office as well. Our agency, I should say. Specific to innovation and entrepreneurship, these are the programs we have. The Innovation Council you've already heard about, and that's the most relevant. We'll dive into that, but I just wanted you to be aware that there are quite a few other innovation programs out there. The SSBCI program is a significant infusion of federal dollars that will be going into investment vehicles, and we can talk more about that another day. We have the University Innovation Research Fund, a research center on metals manufacturing out in Scappoose, and then several other programs focused more on the entrepreneurship side and the capital side. We view our work in 3 areas: innovation, the entrepreneurship, and then capital is the general way to categorize our work. Specific to the Oregon Innovation Council, this was an effort that was started back in 2005. The idea at the time was the governor wanted to make some investments in innovation, but he recognized, this was Kulingowski at the time, recognized that we're a relatively small state budget-wise. We don't have a ton of money to put into this, so we need to focus these monies in the best way possible to realize the biggest benefit. And so the governor pulled together a council to advise the governor's office and us in the legislature on how best to make those investments. First fund money for Oregon Inc. came in 2007, and for this cycle, for those who don't know, the state is on a 2-year budget cycle. So for this cycle, the Oregon Innovation Council is funded at about $18 million. The council itself is a combination of private sector and public sector, high-level people, and there's full information on the membership on our website if you want to dive into that. They do meet quarterly, and again, they're providing that guidance on the investments and then doing the program design, input, and also helping us decide how much money to put into the different program. And the work of the council follows the 2-year budget cycle. So right now, the legislature is in session deciding the budget for the next 2-year cycle. And so the council is very focused on trying to get as many resources as we can for innovation and then figuring out how best to divvy up those resources. Just some highlights here on what the Innovation Council work has accomplished, supported well over 300 companies. That number's a little bit out of date. From that money that the state has put in, over $2 billion in follow-on funding has come back to organizations and companies supported by the council. And that's based on about 100 million, a little over 100 million of state investment. So we're talking 20 to 1 is our return on investment over the history of it. And over 400 groups have used various labs that were partially or fully funded by Oregon Inc. in the universities. Not going to really go through all this. You can read these when you get the slides, but here are the major programs under the Oregon Innovation Council, the Signature Research Centers. Obviously, Otrati OBI is one of those. You'll hear about the Gap Fund in a minute. I'll be talking about the SBIR program. We also have another program called HIOP, which Otrati is also taking advantage of to help with some of the build out of the space there. And we're also looking at making some changes for the next 2-year cycle, going from Signature Research Centers to Centers of Innovation Excellence, and also standing up regional innovation hubs. So we are doing some prep work for that for the next cycle, and then communications as well. Okay, I'll pause there for the overview. Does anybody have any questions about any of that. And Renee, I lost the chat on my view right now. So if there's something in the chat, if you could help me with that, I would appreciate it.
Got it. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment,
Okay.
but folks are encouraged to go ahead and enter their questions as they have them, and then we'll get to them along the way.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, so now we'll dive into the real content, and I'll start with the SBIR, and then I'll get out of the way and let Jordana come up here and talk about the Gap Fund. Now, as far as SBIR goes, there's two parts of our support program. There's the application support, and I'll talk about both of these in more detail in a second. And then there's also matching grants. SBIR program here, it's kind of a funny story of how it started. We actually had some money in an application support program that people had forgotten about, and I stumbled on one day and revived it and grew it. And then we added matching grants. It's kind of a one-off opportunity. And everybody saw the value of the support around SBIR, both on the application side and the matching grant side, and wanted to put more resources into the effort. And so the ad hoc thing I had been doing before was brought under the Oregon Inc. umbrella in 2017. And it's been, from the perspective of the agency and the council, it's been a very successful program in that time. We allotted $2.65 million to the overall support program. And I'll talk about where that went in a minute for this 2-year cycle. So again, that's out of that $18 million budget that I talked about that Oregon Inc. as a whole has. And from at every point in this presentation, I will say SBIR just because it's easier, but everything I say applies to STTR as well. We make no distinction between those two in terms of eligibility or anything like that. So a little bit more on the different parts of the program. Application support. These are small grants. We can give up to $5,000, and as the name implies, it's to help you prepare a better grant application. This is not a new thing to Oregon. This is done around the country in a number of states and areas. And the national convention, naming convention, is to call an application support grant for a phase 1 grant, a phase 0 grants, and one for a phase 2 grant, a phase 00 grant. And I just say that in case you see those terms out there. I've tried to stop using them because they just confuse everyone, and it really doesn't make that much of a difference. But you may see those names out there, but it's all part of the application support program. The funding we provide, most people end up paying a grant writer with our funds, but we don't require that. Excuse me. We allow the companies to tell us what is the best way for you to improve your federal application. So some people have done small data runs, market research is another popular item, grant reviewers as well as writers. But we're flexible. What you just need to do is convince me and my boss of why the effort and the money will help your federal application be better. And we do see that even though these are relatively small grants of up to $5,000, we have seen a significantly higher success rate than the national average. The best data we have is actually on the bioscience sector, or the most specific data. And we have a partnership on this as well that I should talk about that we do with the Oak Tree, the Oregon Clinical Translational Research Institute there at OHSU. We have a partnership with them on this application support program, and the people that have worked with us on these grants have gotten success rates of over 40% of their federal proposals. So that's significantly higher than the 10 to 15% that you'll hear is the national average for phase 1s, is obviously what I'm talking about here. So a small amount of money, but can be very impactful. And in my dream world, we would have more resources for this program, and I would raise the amount of money that we would be able to give people to help with a phase 2 grant or a fast track grant, because I know those are bigger and require more effort. And I understand that $5,000 doesn't go as far for those applications. So I'm aware of that, but haven't been able to raise the amount just yet. But feedback like that, if there are recommendations or that you see these programs in other states that are you think better, please give me that kind of feedback. I'm always open to adjusting these programs to have them make the most sense for the people like you that access them. On the matching grant side, the idea here is, and many of you know this, but I'm just going to speak as if you don't have extensive background with SBIR, but there are gaps in what the federal money can be used for. They do not allow you to do certain things around intellectual property protection or commercial or marketing and customer engagement. That's what I was trying to think of. So we have this matching grant program to help fill those gaps because we see those things obviously as being very important to a company becoming a viable business one day, which is our goal. For the different phase grants, for phase one grant, if you have a phase one grant, you can get a matching grant of up to $50,000. If you have a phase two grant, you could go up to 100. Again, in my perfect world, this has been the levels of these awards since about 2018. And again, in my perfect world, we'd have more money to give out in these, but haven't gotten there yet, but hopefully one day soon. The difference, one thing I left out on the application support part of this, application support grants are not exactly competitive. If we have the money and if you meet the eligibility requirements and you do that part around convincing us of what you want to do with your funding will make your application better, then you get the grants. That is not the case with the matching grants. We don't have enough money to give everyone that gets an SBIR award in Oregon every year a matching grants. I wish we did, but we don't. So we have to make that part we have to make this part a competitive program. We do that 2 or 3 times per biennium, and biennium is our 2-year budget cycle that I mentioned before. 2 is the most common. This current cycle, we did 3. We had some extra funds and some extra time, so we were able to fit in a 3rd one, but it's best to assume we'll do it twice, so once per year. The next time we will offer these grants, we're out of money now, so we have to wait until we get hopefully new money in the budget that the legislature is deciding on right now. Assuming we get more money for this program, we would launch an RFP for matching grants in late August or early September. Traditionally, I've done it right after Labor Day. This past round, I did a little earlier. My theory was that August is a harder time to get people's attention with vacations and everything. End of summer, but we actually got a pretty good response, a similar response to past rounds when we did it a little earlier. So I may launch it earlier, but not quite sure exactly when on that. And then we would ideally do another round in the spring of 2024. And if we have the funding, we would do a 3rd round in the fall of 2024, and that would take us through the next 2-year cycle. The way the eligibility works is, one part of the eligibility is I pick a date that is roughly 18 months prior to when the RFP is issued. And the idea there is that, I don't want to disadvantage people who got a phase 1 award in between the time that we last offered these and didn't have a chance to compete. I want to try to give every company a chance to compete. That said, I can't go back forever because we have to make sure that these are still viable concerns and viable activities by these companies. So we have to have some cutoff, and the balance that I've generally done is around 18 months. So most likely looking at launching one in August or September of 2023, I would probably say is an award date of January 1, 2022 and beyond. So if you have an award that's dated around that time until now, you would be, or until the RFP is issued, you would be eligible to apply. And I also have allowed applications to come in for people who have pending awards. We have allowed those people to submit an application for a matching grant, but the understanding is obviously you have to provide proof that you were officially awarded the federal grant before you would get our matching grant. And there's a number of other eligibility requirements that I'm happy to get into, but that's pretty far into the weeds. So I'll stop there, but feel free to ask any questions if you want to know more specifics on that.
Thank you, Mark. There is a question in the chat. How many matching grants generally get funded per RFP?
Great question. As I flip to the next slide here, we did 41 grants in this current 2-year cycle that we're in. So again, this was 3 rounds. There was, I think 11, 19, and 12 or something like that were the numbers in each round. But we get differing numbers of applications, proposals each time, obviously. And my rough number is somewhere in the 40 to 50%. It might go a little higher in some rounds. It might go a little lower if it's been a while since we offered them and we get flooded with proposals. But somewhere in the 40 to 50% range is the success rate, which is obviously significantly higher than the federal level. But we still don't have the resources to support all companies, but yeah. And as far as just a few tips, things I've seen, just to kind of give you some things to think about if you are submitting one of these proposals. We do have an outside review panel that looks at all these proposals. Ultimately, the decisions are made by the Innovation Council and our agency, but we do have reviewers, and many of them have technical backgrounds. And I try to balance the review process in such a way that the people who are the bioscience experts, they review the bioscience proposals. If I have people who are on the material science side, let's say, maybe that's a bad example since bioscience could be that as well, but try to get people that have some knowledge of the technical sides of this. Obviously, they're not going to be experts in everything, but I highlight that to say that you can assume that you're not writing this to a complete newbie in the review process. So you don't have to go into elaborate detail on the technical side. And honestly, when people because we have a limited amount of space we give you for your proposals, those people that focus too heavily on the technical side and not enough on the commercial side are at a disadvantage. So you definitely, absolutely want to talk about both. And if anything, I'd suggest leaning even more on the commercial side. Part of the beauty of the matching grant program, the reason people like it, is that we rely on the federal agencies who have done the heavy vetting on the technical side, so that once they've done that and they've decided you're worthy of an award, that's a good stamp of approval on the technology side. So it's not as big of a factor here. Things that are big factors is the team you have. And I shouldn't just say the team you have, but also, many of you will be starting out and it's very, very early and you don't have a full team yet. And that's understandable, but do you have a path to having a full team or more of a team? And what's your strategy about filling gaps you have on your team? That even recognizing you have the gaps are okay if you have a plan to address them as you develop your company and your technology. The technology does matter, so I don't want to go too far on the commercial side. So certainly you want to see that there is a market for your technology and that you have at least an idea of how to get there. And that gets into the tactics. So what are your plans, not only to commercialize the technology, but to engage customers, other investors, or potential acquirers along the way? Again, we don't expect you to have done all of these things necessarily before you apply to us, because we understand the stage you all are at, but at least the more you can show you've thought about these things and that you have plans to address them, the better your proposal will look. And another thing that trips a lot of people up is they don't make a clear enough connection to the federally funded project. This is a matching grant, as the name says. So the intent here is to be building off of the federal award. We're not looking to support, while there may be a great application that's way out in another area of work that you want to get to at some point, that's great, but this program is intended to bolster what the federal grant is funding. So be careful that you make it clear how it's going to further your success related to the federal proposal. And I mentioned the reviewers part already, so I won't harp on that again. Renee, was that sufficient on that question, or was there more to it?
That was what the question that he had asked.
Okay.
And if you want to open your chat and add any more to that, please feel free to.
Okay.
Okay. Otherwise, we have another question.
Sure.
Does the matching program have any bias toward or against open source release as a mechanism for productizing work?
No, I would not say that there's any preference one way or the other. It's more looking at what are the prospects for the business. And if that means you want to go one route with respect to that versus another, if you make the case of why that's the right way to go, then we would support it. We don't have there's no black and white line around that.
Great. And we have a question about a mailing list. I think, Heather, did you just link to a place where folks can sign up on Business Oregon for their newsletters?
I did, yes. If you want to receive press releases, I put a link in the chat at 12:26.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you for doing that. Yes, that is the best way to keep informed. Whenever we release an RFP, we send out a notification. We send out a press release. They don't always get picked up. I can't believe it. Somebody wouldn't want to write a big article about this, but they don't typically. So the best way is to get on that email list and you will get notified. And I would offer to add anybody who wants to be added to it, but they don't actually allow me to add people for privacy or whatever reason. So you must sign yourself up and make sure you choose the innovation and entrepreneurship list as well as whatever else, but that's the one that we send the notices to.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, just to give you a quick sense of kind of what the spread of these awards are, I just pulled up this table from our last round. This is not all of the awards. This is most of them. Doesn't have the phase 2. This is the phase 1 matching awards. Just so you can kind of see that, there's as always, there's a heavy number of bioscience, both in the proposal pool and in the award pool. Generally, I have enough in bioscience that I have a dedicated group that works on the bioscience, which works out well. It's definitely the most consistent and highest volume sector that we get proposals from. As you all know, bioscience firms tend to operate with SBIR, so that's not unusual. But we do have other areas as well. And again, you'll see the slides. So you can see some examples very briefly of what the funds have been used for. Okay. Any other questions, Renee?
There is nothing at the moment.
Okay. Well, I will still be here if there are more. Now I'm going to get out of the way and let Jordana talk about the gap.
Apologies for the awkward staging here. We did prep a better camera situation, but
Yeah.
it didn't work. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Commercialization Gap Fund. This is a somewhat different program than what the Oregon Innovation Council traditionally has ran. They tend to be more of the direct grant programs like SBIR match, like Mark discussed. The Commercialization Gap Fund is actually a direct equity investment into companies where the state of Oregon is the limited partner. And the intent is to support the commercialization of early stage technologies, supporting companies during the valley of death, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And the council really wanted to try this approach as a different way to support companies, and also to give the opportunity, if a company does have a really successful exit, that return can then come back to the state and of course grow the fund and make it able to continue. So that's really the long-term goal of the GAP Fund. The other piece of it is that our hope is that the investment with these state dollars will then unlock additional private seed investment, so that ours, being the first money in, will provide that assurance to the private sector that there is something good happening here, and then can lead to additional investment. So with the GAP Fund, as with almost all, if not all, of the Oregon Innovation Council programs, it is focused on our target industries of the Innovation Council. So you can see there on the third bullet, clean tech is also included there. Apologies, I'm not sure why that's not included. But most of these should not be a surprise. And of course, we've got bioscience, medical devices, med tech, pretty much anything that Otrati works on. The other unique thing about this particular program is, because this is an actual fund, what we do, we have put out for competitive bid with each fund, and selected and contracted with a fund manager for the fund. And the fund manager is the one that does the due diligence and makes the selection of investment and has the negotiations in terms of what that deal looks like. So we're a bit kind of one stage removed, but still very involved in the ongoing kind of oversight of this program and ensuring that it meets the goals and the intent of our program. So this is just a visual that I got from Elevate, highlighting the actual gap that we're focusing on. Again, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this and this space, the Valley of Death. Obviously, it's, the earlier stages are the highest risk. And that's really where the Oregon Innovation Council sees the biggest benefit for us to put our resources in, because that's when the private sector is less likely to move forward. And so having this emphasis during the proof of concept phase and the validation phase can really kind of get the ball rolling. And it's a big priority for the Innovation Council. So I've already covered a little bit the goals of the program. Obviously, getting a product or service or technology towards commercialization for a company is the primary goal. That's really the main focus, and we want to support companies as they're moving down this path. As with any of our programs at Business Oregon, we also have the goal to drive economic development in the state. And again, we saw that there was a really critical gap here, and there needed to be additional resources. And so this particular program was designed to meet that. Of course, we want to have a long-term sustainable operating model, having that return on investment come back into the fund if a company does, have a large exit, and then long-term sustainability. That's the ideal. Obviously, there's a really long runway when you're making investments at such an early stage and high risk investments. So we don't anticipate seeing returns at this early stage, but 8 to 10 years from now, that's ideal. And then in the meantime, we'll continue to get additional support from the state legislature for our budget. So just want to talk briefly about the investment parameters. Obviously, the commercialization gap. So a company needs to be in that space where they are trying to get a product or service to market. A company can't have been in business for more than 5 years or have more than $1 million in revenue. So that also ensures that early stage that we're really trying to focus this program on. Oregon focus, these are Oregon dollars. So we want to make sure that this is supporting Oregon companies. So all of these investments must go to Oregon-based companies or have a majority, over 50% of employees in the state, and have an intent to grow. The key partner alignment, this is less about the individual companies, but more about the program in general. As Renee mentioned at the beginning, Business Oregon, the Oregon Innovation Council supports the signature research centers through operating dollars. And so we really, with the Gap Fund, go to Otrati and Virtue Lab and Onami first in terms of, where are you seeing trends, what companies could be a good fit, and really try to leverage that the multiple investments that the Innovation Council has made. There are several Otrati located companies that have received Gap Fund investment. I saw Stone Stable somewhere in the chat. So Ken has received a Gap Fund investment, Viana, and there's several others as well. So we really try to leverage as much as possible. Now, that doesn't ensure that if you're in Otrati or in a signature research center that you're automatically going to get a Gap Fund investment, but it is kind of like the first stop. Type of business. So again, this is around our key target industries that was on the prior slide: advanced manufacturing, bioscience, med tech, et cetera. The sustainable operating model, again, just a repeat of before in terms of returning that investment. And then finally, the deal terms. So this is probably could be the most confusing part of this whole process, because again, Business Oregon is not doing this directly. We've contracted out with the fund manager. In this case is currently Elevate. So we've directed Elevate or whoever is our fund manager to have company friendly terms. That's, there's a really wide range of what that could look like. But we also recognize that these are really high risk because these companies that are receiving the investment are very early stage. So it really ranges in terms of what the deal terms look like. Companies are, and I've talked to some that have been in the middle of negotiations, and I've said, you are free to negotiate and do what is in the best interest of your company. So just want to, make that clear, because it's not the same as a grant where it's just you get the money and it's non-dilutive. So the different deal terms, there's been safes, there's been shared earnings agreements, there's been a wide variety of different things. So there isn't just like one particular deal that we use, kind of one size fits all. It really does just depend on the situation, and we entrust that over with our fund manager. So that was kind of the background of the actual program. I'll just give you a quick summary of where we're at with it. So at this point, we've had 2 funds. We're in the tail end of Fund 2. Fund 1 started in 2020. We actually were just about to sign the contract in March of 2020. So initially the fund was going to be at 5 million because of COVID, and lots of state agency money got swept back. So it got reduced down to 2.5, but we were still able to move forward at a later date in 2020, which was great. And Elevate, as I mentioned, was selected as the fund manager. So they've invested 2.2 million at this point. There's a little bit of follow-on funding remaining, but at this point, that fund is getting near its end in terms of dollar amount. You can see there on the screen in terms of what the portfolio looks like: 15 companies, 41 jobs created. That was as of last quarter. That number has increased, which is we're very pleased with that number. And then you can see the revenue and the additional grant funds and capital raised, which again is even higher. So that's great. The other really fantastic thing is that of those 15 companies, 8 of the founders are female and or BIPOC. So that's one of the theses of Elevate, and a really important criteria for them, as it is for the Oregon Innovation Council. So now it's just a matter of, maintaining the portfolio and, supporting them, and Elevate will continue to do that as well. Then we were able to start a second gap fund in 2022. Fortunately, we were able to add additional funds to it from the first one, so it went up to 4.5. They are in the process of investing now, building out that pipeline. There's around 900,000 to $1 million that's been invested to date. And then the pipeline, as I said, is continuing to build out. One thing with Fund 1, the check sizes were smaller. So we started around 50 to 100,000, and we just heard that wasn't sufficient enough. It wasn't really moving the needle for companies. So for this Fund 2, we've increased the check amount to up to 250. So that's been very impactful, and there's a little more room there to really to make a dent in the work. And then we've also held back more for follow-on funding, so there's ongoing support. So Elevate is planning to complete all these investments, hopefully by the end of the summer. And then again, the follow-on funding will continue through this year, possibly into 2024. And, we'll have the ongoing portfolio management and see what happens with those companies. Then in terms of what's next, we hope to have a third fund. As Mark shared, we're on a biennial budget cycle through the state legislature. So our agency is in the process now of determining or working with the legislature to determine our budget. So we don't know 100% if we will have that fund, and won't know probably until early to mid-summer. Our mailing list is a great way to stay up to date, or just shoot me an email. Once we get the legislative funding, there's still a bit of a lead up time till the money would actually get out to the companies, because again, we put out for a competitive bid for the fund manager. That takes a while. And then once the fund manager is selected, they then start the process of the pipeline development and due diligence and things like that. So if you are interested and think you may be a good fit, definitely send me an email and contact me. I'm happy to chat with you. And then if it feels like it's a good fit, then I'm happy to refer you over to Ben at Elevate, and they can have additional conversations about moving forward. So questions?
Thank you, Jordana. That was great information. I know I've heard myself about the Commercialization Gap Fund and wondered, what is that exactly? So this was excellent overview. We did have a question in the chat. For the Business Oregon programs, is there a vice clause that excludes companies that have to do with sexual health and wellness or the cannabis industry?
That's a great question. So not around sexual health and wellness. And we previously have done, I believe we have supported companies in that space before, but we are not able to provide any support to cannabis, hemp, or marijuana related companies. And that's because those are not legal on the federal level. And as an agency, we receive a lot of federal dollars. And so we don't want to jeopardize the receipt of those funds.
Okay, great. We have another question that is, how does this model work with a biennium budget in terms of future potential returns?
Well, the returns, they're not really related in the sense that the timeline is so long. We don't really take this into account in our budgeting process at this point. Maybe, 8 to 10 years from now, if we get a significant return, and we're able to capitalize a fund at, 5 million, then theoretically we could say, we could lower our budget ask to the state legislature, for example. But it seems so far off. We haven't quite worked that into our plans. And Mark, feel free to add in. But I think at this point, this is really new. As you saw, it just started in 2020. And so we're still kind of figuring out what this will look like long-term in terms of what the returns. But I think at this point, we've looked at the returns as a bonus, not a planned event at this time.
Yeah, and I would just add, sorry, I'm going to take us off sharing. So
okay, yes,
you can see us better, hopefully. And I think that'll, now we can see the chat too. One thing about the kind of the biennium cycle and the legislature and all that, we have put a lot of work into helping the legislature understand that innovation work is not often going to show returns within one biennium. Our biggest returns have been from companies that were supported 5 to 8 years ago. And so we at least finally convinced most of the legislature that we need to be making these investments now and be consistent as much as we can with these investments to see those returns in 5 to 10 years. And that's just the nature of when we'll see returns. And then with this fund in particular, Jordana already said this, but just to emphasize it, our intent, we did this partially to respond to the legislature who was concerned that we were just putting money out there, and then the state doesn't realize any benefit from any big exit that a company has. And so this was a way to put a toe in the water that maybe we can over time develop some monies that would come back to us with the full intent. The only intent for that money would be to put it right back out into organic programs and investments. We're not obviously trying to make money here at the state for that purpose. We just want, but if we can make money, we will recycle it back into these programs.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I did have a question that came to me. What is the turnaround time from inquiry to potential funding?
That's a great question. I don't have an answer because Elevate does that. And they've got their own due diligence process. I would guess it's a couple months. It kind of depends how responsive the companies are, how responsive Elevate is, how long the due diligence process is taking. It's not super quick, but it's probably quicker than if the state was doing it. But I don't have a specific set number of months because it really has varied a lot dependent upon just a variety of different factors.
Okay, great. So yeah, it sounds like Business Oregon has programs for Oregon companies at all stages of development. What would you recommend the very first thing a brand new startup do in terms of funding?
Good question.
This is, you could probably go a lot of ways with that answer, but one thing I would highlight is the roles of our signature research centers. Jordana and I do good work, but it's just the two of us managing all of these various programs as well as other things. And so we don't have the ability ourselves to do a lot of one-on-one support with companies, unfortunately. But we see the signature research centers as a great way to do that. And I know they do great work in that department. So that's always a first place that, that I suggest people go to get it, if nothing else, to understand what options are out there. And then you can hone in on ones that make sense for you. And then similarly, I mentioned Oak Tree before. If you're in OHSU, Oak Tree is a great place to well, you don't even technically have to be in OHSU really, but they're a great place to go for people who think they might want to put a toe into the business world based on their research. So yeah, those would be two of the first groups I would point people to. And then, like I said, after that, it's finding the programs that are most relevant and getting into the weeds of those.
Okay, great. Thank you. Going back to your application support grants of $5,000, is there specific deadlines for that, or is that on a rolling basis?
It's on a rolling basis. As long as we have money, it's open. Because we're coming to the end of this 2-year cycle, we are right up against the limit of the money we have for those. I have some flexibility to pull money from elsewhere to keep supporting grants, but I'm running out of that capacity. So, and I did mean to mention this, so thank you for reminding me. So if you are interested in one of those, talk to me soon. But generally, the requirement in there is that you submit an application to us at least 4 weeks before the federal deadline. We used to say 3 weeks on that, but the reason we added another week was because almost nobody gets me exactly what I need the first time they submit their application for for an application support grant. And that's totally fine. Some of it's on me on the way the program is designed. It's not totally clear on what I need from you. So there's always some back and forth that I do. That program, you submit your application, it's not a yes or no just based on that. I have to work with pretty much every company that applies to get to where I really need to be with the documentation to get the grant approved. So that's why we ask for 4 weeks, so that allows time for us to get through that back and forth, for us to get a contract in place, and then still and to make sure you all have sufficient time to actually, have this effort benefit your federal proposal.
All right, excellent. Does anyone else have any questions? Just feel free to open up your microphone and go ahead and ask. We've got about 6 minutes, 5-6 minutes for questions. So now's the time. Your burning questions answered.
There was one thing in the chat I saw now that I finally had access to it that was talking about NSF having additional money that can be available if you can show outside money. And we've dealt with at least 1 or 2 of those through our matching grant program. So that is an option. It's a little bit different, but we can do that. And another thing I should have said on the matching grant side, the limits, while I said phase 1, you can get up to 50,000, and phase 2, you can get up to 100,000. There's a cap as well on, it can only be up to 50% of the amount you got from the federal government. So if any of you are familiar with the new way that Air Force has been doing SBIRs, and I believe some other parts of DoD may have or will be going this route as well, they have a fast process where they give smaller awards, something in the neighborhood of 50,000, and they write a check right there, supposedly, or they deposit it in your account right there. And so we changed the program so that it's only 50% of what you get from the feds, because the intent was not for us to match 1-to-1, which might happen with some of those Air Force grants.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you for noticing that question. I didn't see it in the chat. This was really helpful. Thank you for all the good information, especially, even basic information like SBIR, STTR grants are, non-dilutive, whereas the Commercialization Gap Fund is an equity investment. And the important tips on application, things that you should remember when you make your application. And also interesting that the Commercialization Gap Fund is for companies up to 5 years old and with a limit on how much revenue that they're making. It's good to know. Any other questions from the audience?
I have one quick one. Just curious, when you were saying it's really important for to talk about the team when you're making these applications, what is an ideal team for you? Like, I mean, if you're out raising, having someone saying, oh, I've raised $200 million before and like brought 2 companies public, like that might be impressive, but that might not be the sort of spirit of what the program is doing here, because if it's like someone who can go raise capital anyway, do you want them? So just like, is there an optimal there? Are you looking for young entrepreneurs or people who are taking their first step in that direction? Just what's sort of ideal for you there?
Yeah, no ideal, I would say, is a short answer, but we want to see, again, that we want to see some balance on the technical and the business side. And but you may be in a situation where you're the technical person and you're so early that it's really just you trying to get your first SBIR. And we understand that that can be the case. But again, that's where you can talk about, I know I'm good here, but I don't have the skills in this area. I'm going to need help in this aspect of customer engagement or marketing. And I know I need that. And here's how I'm going to address that when I'm ready to really engage with customers, let's say. So some combination of the technical and the business side, but again, with an understanding that you may not have it all right now. That not necessarily preference between young and more experienced. I call myself saying old because when Renee said I've been doing this for over 20 years, it gave me a little bit of a mental issue there for a second. But so no specifics there. Certainly, we like to see new people getting engaged as entrepreneurs and innovators, and so we want to encourage that how we can. But it's not a really intentional part of the program to develop those. Yeah.
Perfect.
And one last
Thank you.
thing while I'm talking is that so I'm now the manager of the INE, the Innovation Entrepreneurship Team. I'm stepping away from the program role, so hopefully, if not, I might not still be with us. By the time we do another RFP for matching grants, it will not be my name on it at that point. It'll be somebody new, but I will be working closely with that person to ensure as much continuity in the process as we can. And we're hiring for that person now. So you'll see a new name is my point. Don't be surprised. We just don't know who it is yet.
Good. One last question. How hard and fast is the 5-year rule for a company in terms of the Gap Fund investment?
I suppose there's some flexibility, but, we really are trying to meet the intent, which is, really early stage, needing these funds to get to commercialization. So there would have to be pretty good justification, explanation for why it's been that long and you're still kind of in those early stages. Understanding, certain bioscience companies, especially, I know tend to have a longer runway with that. So it's not a hard black line, but there does need to be some explanation and justification.
And while I know we're out of time, one quick thing on the relevant or related thing on the SBIR side is that we don't have a specific rule, but if you've gotten more than 4 SBIRs in the last couple of years, generally that starts to be a red flag for us. We ask you at a minimum to explain why you've had so many SBIRs and what commercialization activities you've done to date. Because and the main thing there is we don't want to be supporting SBIR mills. If you're familiar with SBIR, that means something to you. We do have a couple of those in the state, and I'm not interested in giving them any of our money because they they've got their business model worked out and they can scam the feds all they want. But I do know that the bioscience sector tends to be one where there are multiple awards to a company, and that can still be an okay thing. And so we have some flexibility there, but we do want you to explain it if you have a bunch of previous awards.
Great, thank you. Yeah, oh, thank you so much. We really appreciate Business Oregon coming today to give this talk. We've got a couple of more programs planned with them this year because they have so many offerings out there for Oregon companies. So we really appreciate it. The program has been recorded, and we'll be sending out the recording in a day or two, and along with the slide deck. And always bear in mind that all this information is effective as of today. Things are always subject to change. You never know what's going to come around the corner, but we hope that your programs are long-lived because so many companies are benefiting from them. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here, and hope you have a great rest of your week. And we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.